Many believe that everything ends at death, but according to Dolores Cannon, there's something far more profound awaiting souls when they cross the veil. In her decades of research through hypnotic regression, she identified common patterns among those who passed peacefully, especially the elderly. One of these discoveries was particularly striking. Souls who lived long and tranquil lives when faced with their journey after death don't complain about pain, illness, or the passage of time. What they regret most is something few would expect. They are silent regrets, appearing even in the happiest memories. Dolores said that even among those who were loved, respected, and left good memories behind, there's always a sensitive point that repeats itself. And this realization becomes a valuable lesson, especially for those who are still here and have the chance to adjust what truly matters. These souls don't regret not having more money or possessions. Nor do they talk about the houses, cars, or objects they accumulated. What surfaces most in the sessions is the awareness that time was misused, not because they did wrong things, but because they didn't do what they wanted to do. According to Dolores, many seniors regret not having spoken more about what they felt, not having been more affectionate, or not having reached out to certain people they loved. Some held grudges for decades, waiting for the other person to take the initiative. Others failed to forgive, not for lack of desire, but out of pride or fear of appearing weak. If you're watching this video and feel that any of this resonates, perhaps it's time to reflect. Please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps us get these messages to those who also need to hear them. Dolores recounted that in many cases, these souls were moved to tears when remembering the small choices they put off. It wasn't grand decisions that caused regret, but simple gestures that seemed insignificant at the time. A hug that could have been given, a phone call that was postponed, a visit that never happened. The soul, upon leaving the body and observing its trajectory, perceives more clearly that life is made up of these details. They don't take up much space on the calendar, but they define the feelings that remain. For many elderly people who lived quiet lives, this revelation is a call to humility and reconciliation, not with others, but with themselves. By understanding this, these souls wish that those who are still living can avoid the same silent laments that they carry. Another recurring discovery was the idea that happy souls tend to be the most reflective. They aren't the ones who sought perfection in life, but the ones who learned from their own mistakes. Dolores explained that even people who didn't follow spiritual or religious paths upon passing understood that the true value of life lay in human connections. Friends, children, grandchildren, neighbors, even strangers. Each encounter brought an opportunity. Many seniors reported in life that they were tired of socializing, but after death, the souls miss precisely that. The simple moments with other people, the unhurried conversations, the shared time. When there's no longer a clock to count the minutes, it's the wasted time that weighs heaviest. And this isn't a cause for guilt, but for awareness. There's also a lesson that comes up frequently in the regressions conducted by Dolores, that many souls would have liked to have been kinder to themselves. People who spent their lives demanding perfection, comparing themselves to others, or feeling they were never enough. Upon leaving the body, these souls are faced with the truth that they did the best they could with what they had, and yet they spent years in internal conflict. Dolores affirmed that this is one of the most painful regrets, because it stems from a demand that no one else imposed. The soul realizes that it was its own judge, and that self-love was what it most needed to have developed. For the older audience, this reflection is essential. There's still time to look at oneself with more kindness, accept one's own flaws, and value one's own story. Dolores said that one of the most surprising revelations was the silence of the souls regarding the fear of death. What was most impactful wasn't the moment of passing, but what wasn't lived fully. It wasn't the absence of heartbeats that weighed heavily, but the absence of words spoken, of laughter shared, of steps taken towards what made sense. For many who lived well, what remained was the question, why didn't I allow myself more? And this question is asked without bitterness, but with a curiosity that teaches. Life, for these souls, isn't something to be accumulated, but something to be shared. And the more it's shared, the lighter the departure becomes. Time, for those who are still living, can still be an ally. We just need to know how to use it intentionally. Dolores also identified something moving in the sessions. Souls who lived surrounded by love still felt that they hadn't expressed everything they felt. Even the elderly, who had present families, long-term partners, and loyal friends, carried regrets for not having shown more affection in life. Many said they thought the other person already knew, that it wasn't necessary to repeat it. But looking back, the soul realizes how much those words could have warmed a difficult day, healed an old resentment, or simply made someone smile. This reveals how economical we are with what we have, that is simplest and most valuable. And it also shows that no matter how long life is, it will always seem short if we hold back too much of what could have been shared. An affectionate gesture is never small when viewed from the other side of existence. In some sessions, Dolores noticed that the souls were surprised to realize that they had been more important to others than they imagined. People who went through life thinking they didn't make a difference, that they were just part of the background, discovered that they had been a silent reference, a source of support or an inspiration. It's common for elderly people to feel forgotten, as if they had already accomplished everything. But in spiritual reality, many of these souls saw how much their presence influenced grandchildren, neighbors, colleagues, even if in brief moments. The absence of recognition in life doesn't mean an absence of value. On the contrary, often the impact of a gesture or attitude is only understood later. And this awareness brings peace, but also a warning. Never underestimate the good you can cause, even when you don't realize it. Another point frequently addressed in the experiences reported by Dolores is the relationship with time. The soul said that, in life, time seemed to slip away. There was always something more urgent, a task, a weight, a distraction. When death arrives, time takes on another proportion. What seemed commonplace becomes precious. The souls remembered ordinary mornings, conversations in the kitchen, silent walks, and realized how much these moments were the true fabric of life. Dolores reinforced that living in the present with attention is one of the greatest lessons that the elderly can apply. It's not about living in a hurry or being afraid of wasting time, but about being whole in each moment. The soul, upon passing, doesn't take perfect memories but whole sensations. What remains isn't what was idealized, but what was lived with truth. In several sessions, there also appeared the lament for not having cultivated more inner silence. Many souls reported that during life, they avoided being alone with their own thoughts. They filled the time with noises, commitments, distractions. Dolores observed that, after death, the soul sees itself face to face, and those who didn't do this exercise in life may feel strangeness when facing their own inner reflection. For the elderly person who is still here, this is a valuable chance, learning to listen to oneself, to respect one's own rhythms, to cultivate calm. It's not necessary to become a monk, but to find moments of pause to recognize what one feels, what one desires, what one needs. Silence, far from being empty, can be the most direct bridge between what we are and what we can still be. Dolores also pointed out that most happy souls wished they had simplified life more. In life, many seniors felt overwhelmed by external expectations, family traditions, or obligations that didn't always make sense. After death, they realized that the essential was far beyond conventions. The souls said that the most precious moments were simple: a conversation on the porch, an impromptu lunch, an afternoon of laughter. They weren't planned events or luxurious celebrations, but moments of true connection. The lesson that emerges from this is clear. When we simplify, we see better. We remove the excess and realize what truly matters. For the elderly person who is still walking on this side of life, this perception can be liberating. It's not necessary to please everyone, but only to live with coherence and lightness. Many souls also lamented not having expressed gratitude in life more often. Dolores said that thanking is a form of silent recognition, which strengthens bonds and gives meaning to events. Even the souls who lived with serenity realized after death that they failed to thank for small favors, for constant presences, for discreet learning. Gratitude, when not expressed, can be lost in time. When it is said, it transforms the relationship. For those who are aging, learning to thank not only the other, but also their own life, is a gesture of wisdom. Each day lived, even with limitations, is a space that can be filled with meaning. And when the soul understands this, life ceases to be just a passage and becomes a continuous construction, made of recognition, choices, and presence. Another aspect that frequently emerged in the accounts analyzed by Dolores was the way souls perceived fear. In life, many elderly people felt fear of making mistakes, of being judged, of disappointing others, or even of not living up to what was expected of them. But, after death, this fear seemed irrelevant. The souls understood that mistakes were a natural part of the process, and that the judgments of others didn't define who they really were. What mattered was how they had treated people, how honest they were with themselves, and whether they managed to maintain their dignity even in difficult moments. For those who are still alive, this perspective can bring relief. Fear often paralyzes us, prevents choices, and distances us from valuable experiences. When you understand that it's just a reflection of the unknown, it loses its strength. And then the freedom to live with more courage and authenticity is born. Many happy souls also demonstrated a deep desire that the living not make the same mistakes. Dolores frequently described that, after understanding their own journey, these souls wanted to convey simple and practical advice. One of them was, don't wait for special occasions to show affection. Another, equally recurrent, was, don't postpone your important decisions. The souls seem to understand that time doesn't forgive indecision, and that each postponed choice can become a regret. It wasn't about living in a hurry, but about living with intention. When you live knowing that everything could be the last time, there's no room for pride or vanity. Words take on another weight, gestures become clearer, and the heart aligns with what really matters. It's in this simplicity that the wisest souls found peace. Among the most consistent discoveries was the importance of forgiveness. Dolores affirmed that even the souls who lived in harmony at some point felt the pain of not having forgiven. Sometimes they were small episodes, other times deep wounds, but the pattern repeated itself. Forgiveness was never for the other person. It was a relief for oneself. After death, the souls realized that carrying resentments was like walking with stones in your pocket, unnecessarily, and that forgiving didn't erase the pain of the past, but allowed it not to contaminate the present and the future. For those who have lived decades, perhaps there is something to forgive, a family member, a friend, oneself. And even if the other party is no longer present, forgiveness can still happen, silent, internal, liberating. It doesn't require words, just willingness. And it can completely change what is still to come. Dolores also reported that souls rarely clung to what they left materially. Possessions, inheritances, documents, all of this remained as part of a distant memory. What mattered was the effective legacy, how they were remembered, how they marked the people around them, what they taught with their way of living. The happy elderly soul wasn't proud of the amount of property accumulated, but rather of the number of hearts touched. This is an essential point of reflection. Still in life, many people dedicate years to building financial security, which is important. But when this search overlaps with bonds and real presence, something is lost. Balance is possible. And the memory that is perpetuated isn't that of the person who left a detailed will, but that of the person who sat at the table, looked into your eyes, and was truly present. Another factor that emerged strongly was how much the souls valued closed cycles. Dolores described souls who felt at peace not because they had lived perfect lives, but because they had closed chapters with clarity. They resolved misunderstandings, apologized, ended relationships with honesty. These souls taught that it's not necessary to keep everything undefined to preserve harmony. On the contrary, clarity brings lightness. For the elderly, this can be a delicate task, as it involves stirring up old memories, reliving pains, and facing realities that were sometimes pushed into oblivion. But when done with care, this life review can be a gift. Closing cycles allows the new to emerge, even if it doesn't last many years. The soul doesn't carry pending issues, and the body can rest more peacefully. A less expected but recurring point was the value of humor. Yes, many souls lamented not having laughed more. Dolores was surprised to hear so often that the lightness of a laugh, even in the midst of difficulties, made a difference. Life can be hard, unfair, and full of challenges, but laughter, when sincere, brings relief and humanity. Happy elderly souls fondly remembered the funny moments, the innocent jokes, the unexpected laughter, and they regretted not having allowed more of these moments, laughing with others, at oneself, at everyday situations. It's not about denying the pain, but about not drowning in it. For those who have gone through so many phases of life, perhaps now remains the freedom to laugh without worrying so much. And this, in the end, can be one of the purest forms of wisdom, seeing life with lightness, even knowing all that it can carry. In many accounts, Dolores pointed out that happy souls had a mature relationship with the end of life. They didn't see death as punishment or injustice, but as a natural part of the journey. This acceptance didn't come from religious thought or dogmas, but from a clear conscience. They knew they lived with intention, even with flaws, and therefore they could move on in peace. This vision is something that can be cultivated still in life. Aging with serenity requires recognizing the limits of the body, yes, but also the learnings of the spirit. It's not about waiting for the end, but about enjoying the time with meaning. Dolores said that this understanding made the last breath a point of passage, not of loss, and that everyone, regardless of age or belief, could reach this state. It was enough to look at one's own life with honesty, recognize what was lived and make peace with what wasn't. Something that always moved Dolores was realizing how the happy souls spoke of simple people. They weren't great personalities or heroes, but common figures. The neighbor who helped at the market, the grandson who smiled when visiting, the friend who called just to ask how they were. These figures occupied a huge space in spiritual memory. This shows how much human relationships, even the most modest ones, have power. It's not necessary to do great deeds to mark an existence. Sometimes, a good day said with truth is what remains, and this invites us to rethink our priorities. How many times do we fail to pay attention to someone because we are too busy with what we consider urgent? Dolores said that, after death, the soul realizes that the most important wasn't on the to-do lists, but in the encounters, and that each person touched is a seed that remains even when we are no longer here. Another recurring learning was about listening. Dolores reported that many souls lamented not having listened more to others with real attention. In life, everyone is in a hurry to speak, to give opinions, to advise. But really listening without judgment, without distractions, is rare. The souls realized that by listening to someone with presence and respect, they were offering something precious, and that this many times was worth more than any advice or gift. For the elderly who still have people around them, this gesture can be a form of deep connection. Stop, look into their eyes, let the other person speak until the end. It's not necessary to agree, just welcome. Dolores saw in this a spiritual act, a way of elevating the value of the moment, and, according to the souls, those who learn to listen are already preparing to be remembered with tenderness, because listening is, above all, recognizing that the other person matters. In some sessions, Dolores also heard souls who regretted having kept their talents to themselves. People who knew how to sing, write, paint, or teach, but who put it aside out of fear, shame, or lack of time. After death, they realized that these gifts weren't just for themselves, but for others, and that by hiding them, they failed to touch lives. This is something that can resonate with many elderly people. Maybe you have something you always liked to do, but left in the past. There's still time. Gifts don't age, they just sleep. And when they are awakened, they bring life to those who offer them and to those who receive them. It's not about performing in public or seeking recognition, but about sharing what is yours with authenticity. According to Dolores, this simple gesture generates joy for the soul and meaning for the days. It's a gift that has no expiration date nor price, but that leaves lasting marks. Another delicate but constant point was the regret for having left the care of the body in the background. Dolores heard many souls saying that if they had listened to the signals of the body with more attention, they could have lived with more quality. They didn't talk about it with guilt, but with clarity. The body, even tired, is still the instrument of the soul. And respecting it is also a form of gratitude, eating well, walking, sleeping regularly, listening to the pains without ignoring them. Small cares that make a difference. For those in their golden years, this isn't just a medical recommendation, but an act of love. The body responds with more vitality when it is treated with respect, and the soul thanks you. Dolores said that the souls didn't miss the young body, but the well-treated body. Caring for health is, therefore, a gesture of presence and of preparing to leave with dignity. When closing her sessions, Dolores always reinforced that happy souls wanted only one thing, that their stories serve as learning for the living, that the regrets reported weren't a reason for sadness, but for motivation. Therefore, if you've come this far, maybe there's something inside you that can still be rescued, healed, or restarted. Life, even at the end, is still a fertile space for sincere changes. It's not too late to say what you feel, forgive who needs to be forgiven, make peace with your own story. If this video touched something in you, consider sharing it with someone who can benefit from this message. And if you want to receive more reflections like this, subscribe to our channel. The lessons of elderly souls aren't just advice, they are invitations to live more consciously, more simply, and above all, more truthfully.